Amazing. Okay, let's learn a little bit. We're Daf Lamed Dalet Amud Bet, and we're going to get underway immediately, presently, with just a very quick review. I'm not going to go through every line of the Gemara, just to remind you the sections of what we talked about. Number one, trying to define what is the Etrog itself. On Lamed He Amud Aleph, we darshan the psukim, or the pasuk, or the words of the pasuk, Pri Eitz Hadar, Eitz Shatam, Eitz Upiria Shaveh. We went through all different permutations, back, forth, up, and down, trying to understand what it means, why it is that way, and what it signifies for us. Different derivations of what the word hadar might mean, what its implications might be. That was the first section. The second section, which will be the meat and potatoes that I promised last time, that hopefully we'll delve into a little bit tonight, is concerning the issue of various problems with an etrog in terms of its halachic status, and then the issue of orla, and mixed into the issue of orla was the question within the Gemara, whereas there's a particular problem with asher and iran hidachat's etrogim is not the same problem seemingly as the problem of orla. And then we had the back and forth about what are the chief characteristics that we require in order to be able to make use of the etrog. Do we have to be able to know that we can eat it? Do we have to know that we can have enjoyment from it? By the by, those are not always coterminous. We saw there's a status of mammon, meaning that it has a status of being in your control from a financial perspective or not, which by the by, not the same thing as declaring something ownerless. That's something else. That's hefker. But this isn't hefker. This is just that there's some issue with the ability, your ability to control it. And remember, that was from that magic word, lachem. And lachem is a controlling word in the world of the Daled Minim. It was true for Lulav Hagazul. It was true for Shaul. It was true on the first day, borrowing, stolen, borrowed, etc. And it is true now for the other of the Daled Minim as well. We'll see that when it comes to the etrog, maybe it's a little bit different. That's what the Gemara is angling at than lulav, even in terms of what lachem actually means. I'm going to unpack that a little bit tonight. So I'm just giving sort of the broad brushstrokes. And the Gemara was discussing what the practical difference would be. Can we have something that you can eat but you don't own, or something that you can own but you can't eat? And the Gemara said, yes, there are examples of each. I said that backwards. Something that you can eat but you don't own, that's Maser Sheni, at least according to Rabbi Meir. Maser Sheni, remember, after you take the tithe that you give to the Kohen, that's Truma, that's 1/50th approximately, it's about 2%. Then you take 10% of whatever's left, you give that to the Levi, and then you take 10% of that in years 1, 2, 4, and 5 of the Shemitah cycle, and you can eat that for yourself as long as you're in Yerushalayim. If you're not in Yerushalayim, you can't eat it, but in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Meir maintains you're eating something that doesn't really belong to you. It's a tithe that belongs to the temple treasury, Malan Hagavoa, but you can eat it. Conversely, and we'll come back to this tonight, this is going to be the Tosafot that we're going to see. Truma Tameya is something that a Kohen may not eat. It's impure, but in the process of burning it, you can put it under your foodstuffs, and you can enjoy the combustion, the fuel that it provides. So that would be allowed. So that's part of the discussion. Yeah. Okay. Now, in a related story. I'm just queuing something up that I forgot to queue up before, so I'm sort of multitasking here, but you get the point of it shortly. Because we had a bingo tonight for the previous Parsha Shavu, which is rare, but we actually have one. I'm not going to pass up the opportunity. So a bingo, as I call it, a bingo. You'll see it. Okay, we're not there yet. Halavai will just get there. So listen, the Gemara had mentioned these two things. Then the Gemara had another section related in which it asked the question about what do we do when we speak about the notion of possessiveness of some of these elements when it comes to certain mitzvahs. And one of them that was marshaled, and this was a discussion toward the bottom of the page, was the discussion about the matzah of Maser Sheni. Do you have to own the matzah that you eat? It's Maser Sheni matzah. You go to your Yerushalayim, you have your Seder there. So maybe you could eat that. Yes, yes, no, no. Chacham say yes. Rabbi Meir says no. And then we had the question of the challah, being mafresh challah from Maser Sheni, dough of Maser Sheni, taking the challah tithe. We don't have to take a tithe, something that you don't own. It's not yours. It belongs to Hashem. So don't take a tithe to give to the Kohen. It already belongs to God. you have to give the God's representative. So there's a question there about the comparison between the world of possession when it comes to Etrog, where it's lachem, versus matzah. The Gemara actually asks in one place, does it say matzatchem? No, not directly, but sort of a hekesh from the world of challah, where you have to own it, where it's the word lechem, and we have in matzah lechem oni. Well, it's kind of a hop, skip, and a jump. Is that really connected? And that's the discussion. The Gemara goes to 35b, where it essentially leaves it in a way open-ended. Maybe dough is different because with regard to dough, the challah mitzvah, it says twice arisotechem in short order within those psukim, right? Within the psukim, two psukim, from 2 parshas ago. Reshit arisotechem, challah, tarimu truma ki trumat goren, kain tarimu otah. And then again, Mereshit arisotechem tiknu laHashem truma ladorotechem. So you got a second time you had that reference to arisa, to the dough of the kneading trough. So maybe there it's like a stronger idea. You actually have to own it. Maybe with regard to some of these other mitzvahs that we're discussing here, maybe it's not as strong a requirement. Maybe that's what the Gemara wants to suggest. I gave you just now a very cursory overview, but it's all with an eye toward now delving into the beginnings of the Gemara and Lamed Hey Amud Aleph with the Shalasher, Shirli Dachat, and Truma Tameh and Or. Let me pause here for questions, and then if not, then we'll get underway.
Well, just
please.
Clarification question. So I think it was the Ritva that says that the lachem that's there implies that it has to be usable if the hana or some kind of
The ability to get hana,
in all of its forms. So
Yeah.
Because the etrog's edible.
Yeah.
It has so
Right.
The fact that this potentially has a restriction related to truma, is the question really how much of that hana or how much of that benefit you have to get to qualify it under the lachem? Is that where the Gemara is going with this, or is the Gemara saying no? It has to be 100% me'achuz you, and if it's not, then it's not.
So it's a great question. This is going to be, this is one of the things that Tosafot is going to grapple with on our page tonight. This question. Stay tuned.
Okay.
This is actually part of it.
Okay.
I'm going to reference the Rifai. I know what you're referencing. But let me before we get to that, that's drilling down. Yeah, we're getting there. We're going to turn up the microscope. What?
I'm going to leave now.
Well, you can leave now. It's exactly right. Well, you got credit. You're good. Leave on a high. I want to give us a little more of a conceptual just understanding of where Etrog differs from the other of the Daled Minim. So bear with me. This is off the page, but just sort of line things up in a categorical manner. With thanks as ever to the Masifta Gemara, because this organized things so beautifully, so richly. I do a little fact checking, and then good, we're good to go. So 4 things. First of all, ulakachtem, the fact that you need a lakicha tama, you need a whole object as opposed to missing parts of it. With regard to the etrog, no less than anything else, but particularly with regard to the etrog, it's even more vulnerable than some of the other minim in terms of what can go wrong with it. There could be parts missing from something, could be dry, or it could be spread apart. But here we have other issues. The color could be off, the texture could be off. There could be different kinds of bletelach that are problems, that sort of the brownish pieces that we find, little stains. There could be boils that are coming up on it, chazaziot. There could be issues with parts of it missing, punctures, et cetera, all different things. So ulakat and lakicha tama, we have just the consideration that the Ran points out here that, in fact, the whole issue of lakicha tama, a whole taking, which in the general context means you have to take all 4 at the same time. That's what Tosafot had taught. Remember, you can't just pick up 1 in the morning and 2, 3, and 4 throughout the day. It has to be at the same time. Fine. The Ran, not everyone agreed with that either, by the way. Some thought you could do it sequentially, 1, 2, 3, 4. Fine. But the Ran says the whole issue of chaser, of something being missing, is the distinction between lakicha tama, means in the case of the etrog, the whole thing is there, as opposed to it missing a portion of it. That is not the same thing, as when we speak about the issue of the din of hadar, meaning something beautiful. Why? Because whatever's left of the etrog can still be hadar. It's missing a part of itself, fine, but it's still hadar. To the extent that it exists, it's hadar. Okay, for the Ran, these two concepts were uncoupled from each other. It's not that if it's chaser, it's not hadar anymore. It's not beautiful. It's if it's chaser, it could be hadar to a point. But the problem with it is that it's lacking a portion. It's not lekicha tama. It's not whole. Now, where that line is, it depends on what day of Yontif it is, etc. The Levush holds, for instance, the psul of chisaron means anything is missing, right? Even if it's beautiful, if it's missing any of it, so it doesn't fall because it's lacking in the principle of being hadar, it lacks the ability to be lekicha tama. And that's what destroys it. Now, the Ritva, not in the same context that you mentioned, but since you brought up the Ritva mentions already at the beginning of the parak that the idea here is that chaser is a psul of hadar. If something's missing from the fruit, it's an aesthetic blight on its status. That's no longer hadar. And for the Ritva, you have this consistency of pre-eitz hadar. The notion of hidur applies to the lulav and the hadassim and the arabot. Obviously, it applies to the etrog. And if in the lulav and the hadassim and the arabot missing a part, potentially, it destroys its integrity. So when it comes to the etrog, it's the highest standard of all of hidur. If you're missing a part, then you don't have hidur. That's all.
But didn't we say that only applies to the first day? It's not. It doesn't apply to the next days of Sukkot.
Okay, so we're going to come to that. Right. So hold on.
Okay.
Give me 5 minutes. I'll be there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's a very important point. Is first day versus the rest of it. Remember, the Torah itself makes plain that it's on the first day. Then it says you also take it 7 days, which our understanding generally is it refers to the taking of 7 days. But it's smachtim lifnei Hashem Elokeichem means where are you before God? Only in the Makom HaMikdash. And maybe the standard changes from day one, Chutz La'aretz day one, and maybe even day 2 to the rest of the days of Yom Tov. There's no longer Deoraita outside of the Makom HaMikdash.
Going back a little bit, the word peri, taking a peri, eitz hadar would imply has to be whole. A peri is not half, only part.
Right, but those, let's say, I don't know, the issue of, let's say, the way the Ran sees it, he says no. So if you're missing a part of the pre, so it could still be beautiful because, as we will shortly see, and some of us already know, when you go check for the etrog, there's something special about the top portion when you're looking at it radially. You're looking at the shoshanta and the pitum underneath it, or the dad, and then the top piece, the chotam, seems to have more stature than the rest of it on the bottom. So maybe the whole notion of hidur is actually limited because you hold it in your hand after all. So the part that's protruding. So when you would hold it that way, you're looking at it, top down.
Does it matter how you describe that? Because at the end of the day, you need it whole. They all agree on that.
But the question is, at what point is it no longer whole? Meaning, if you have 65%, is it whole? Well, if you hold that whole means whole, the Levush says whole means everything, then if you're missing any little part, it's finished. It's chaser, it's not lekicha tama, right? But according to some, maybe the issue of chaser just means that you have to have most of it there.
Oh, I see. I thought you said that, okay, so I misunderstood the opinion that doesn't say whatever. That's missing. Yeah, okay, I got it.
Yeah. So okay. So it's just for consideration. It's different. So different shomim. The first factor is ulekachtem lachem ulekachtem lekicha tama, a whole taking. What does that mean? And the different rishonim go back and forth. Again, just to think about it conceptually. Number 2, the whole notion of lachem, according to the Rambam, at least based on the understanding of the Achila and the Kapot Tamarim, the notion that it says in the Torah specifically a pre-eitz. So if there's anything wrong with it, like it is an Isser Hana or Isser Achila, then it's no longer a pre. It's like it doesn't exist, because the status of a fruit means that I can access it. That's according to the understanding of the Kapot Tamarim. The Ravid in Hilchot Lulav, and the Ramban also in his critical glosses on the Ravid, all the Psulei Etrog are only going to be on the highest level when we're talking about it being. I skipped. Sorry, I skipped. I skipped to Hadar. Sorry, Lachem might mean actually that you no longer have the pre if it no longer has the Isser, if it's lacking. Either it has Isser Hana, has Isser Achila. That's what the Gemara is debating. We're going to come back to that with Tosafot. That's what we're going to dive into. So bookmark number 2. Sorry, number 3, Hadar. So the Ritva, and this is what you had referenced previously, the Etrog without the status of Hadar. So you shouldn't even take it even Bishat Hadchak. It's the highest level of Hidur that we have, that exists, right? And on that, sorry, the Ravid and the Ramban, all of Psuli Etrog, when we talk about the Chotam, anything from the, I mean, again, there's a debate where the Chotam starts, but if you look at it sort of radially, where the Shipua, where the slant begins, from the, let's say the equator, if you will, equatorial line of the Etrog, and up, where it starts to become more conical, that's where you have to be concerned. And that would, anything that's that would impinge upon the status of Hadar there, that's where it gets destroyed, right? Now, the fourth factor, again, so now we have ulakachtem lekichatama, we have the notion of lachem, we have the issue of Hadar, and the fourth one, unique to the world of Etrog, is nigmar pirio, has to be a complete fruit. And we talked about that. If it's unripened, it's too dark, because it's still green. Now, if it grows to the point where it's ripened and it's still green, so it's a green Etrog, the universe. So people who do that, they do that, you know. But if it's a dark green, that's the color of a leek, that's no good. Forest green, we would say, something like that. Yeah. If it's almost black, that's not good. Now, back on Chaf Tet Amud Bet, there was a Tosafot there. And Tosafot there on 29b, I don't want to read the whole Tosafot because I want to see the Tosafot on Lamed Aleph, but it was the Tosafot on Be'inan Hadar Veleka, the bottom of 29b. I'm pretty sure we actually had learned it the other time up. Yeah, we did it. So just to refresh your memory, I'm just saying it outside.
I remember it, but I know it.
Yeah, we did it. So I'm going to tell you outside. She's like, oh yeah, we did learn it.
Yeah,
So,
we learned it.
and that's
did.
what I referenced it, right? That's what you're referencing.
Right.
Tosafot, that here we have this idea that what does it actually say specifically in that Tosafot? Tosafot says the psulim that we're speaking about here, Hadar, Hadar as an example, is only the first day. After the first day, all the other days, the main idea of Lakicha altogether is the Rabbanan outside of the Beit HaMikdash. And the rest of the psulim don't really obtain. Now, based on that, so for example, when it comes to chaser, going through it, you don't have Lakicha Tami, you have something chaser. So if most of it exists, so we'll probably say it's still kosher. Now, how much is most of it? That's what the debate is. That's where we get into the soup about what it means. You know, if you say that chaser is a psul of hadar, you don't uncouple the two, but you say the fact is chaser equals a psul and hadar, now we have a problem. Because the issue of it being at least mehudar in some regard does get carried over. It's like the only thing that gets carried over. Lakicha Tama doesn't get carried over, but Hadar does. So if you have an etrog that's missing a little piece on the bottom, the question is, if we say, now it's practical, you know, day 2 through 7, you have an etrog missing a little piece. It got lopped off. I don't know. You're making a salad, like from that movie. You're making a salad, you cut off a little piece. Oh my goodness, it's terrible. So now what do? So if you hold that there's chaser is over here and hadar is over there, so the part that's left is still very nice looking. So happens, just don't look down. But if there's a psul of hidur, okay, so that might be carried over now. Now it's still going to be obtained, you know, still relevant, even after the fact, even days 2 through 7.
Mhm.
Next thing, lachem, you need lachem. So there's no lachem after the first day. Remember? That's why you can borrow from other people, right? So the only exception to that would be, and that would obtain all the days, is mitzvah baba avera, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Remember, that was the whole story about mitzvah baba avera, which we spent months on, or it felt like months. Apologies to those who were tired of it. But Shmuel in the Gemara, there on 30a, actually says, no, come to think of it, on days 2 through 7, even if it's stolen, you can still do it. That's not mitzvah baba avera. And some of us, our eyes went, well, what do you mean? Mitzvah baba avera? It's morally, opprobrious and disgusting. And it's true, yeah. But from a technical perspective, he said, there's no such thing as mitzvah baba avera beyond the first day. So chaser and lachem may be impacted. The third one, can you do the third one? That's a question. Can you hold it? Or
I can hold it.
I don't want you to lose it though.
President, I can hold it.
I'm just.
Not sure if I needed it for a long time.
We're being recorded, Mark. This is like on the record, but I don't know if your question is being picked up, so that's good. Third, on the issue of Hidur itself, that does, according to Rashi, most Rishonim, it seems it does apply all 7 days, okay? But there is one Rishon, not a small Rishon either, the Ramban. The Ramban had this very far out idea. I don't know who supported him in this. I just don't know. you could possibly read this into the Rambam as well. The Ramban holds that the Mishnah on 29b was actually just talking about in the Mikdash. So he was talking about the mitzvah of lulav all 7 days. So therefore, to him, lachem only existed on the first day, but he thinks hadar is also the all 7 days in the Mikdash. But according to the Ramban, outside of the Beit HaMikdash, on days 2 through 7, we don't even need hadar. He thinks that the whole Mishnah is only talking about the Makom HaMikdash, it's only talking about the 7 days in the Mikdash, and it's all in the plane of the Oraita. The Gemara took as an assumption that all these issues were only being dealt with for the first day. Remember, the Gemara opened with, well, hadar, of course, lachem, that's the first day. What about the rest of the days? No, you don't need it. But what about hagazul? Why is that puzzle? Well, it's puzzle, and that's where we branched off. Mitzvah of Avera, yes, yes, no, no, right? The Ramban says, no, that whole Mishnah was just in the level of the Mikdash. That's what the Mishnah was talking about. And that's why it never mentioned a chiluk between Makom HaMikdash and the Gvulin, because it didn't have to. It's only talking about the Makom HaMikdash. If the Mishnah wants to make a chiluk, then it does that. How do I know? He says, my recollection, he says, like in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, where it talks about blowing the shofar on Shabbat, it makes a chiluk between being in the Mikdash or in the Medina. That doesn't do it here. Why not? The assumption is the Mishnah is still pristine. It's talking about the base of the Mikdash, but outside the Beit Mikdash, there isn't even Din Hadar. The Rambam seems to go in this direction in the 8th parak of Hilchot Shofar Lulav, Shofar Sukka Lulav, Ayin Sham. We're not going to go too much farther into it, but just to think about it. So again, this whole thing is probably just for the first day, according to most. We try to be machmir on all the days of Sukkot for these issues, but sometimes there's a shot at chak, and you see where there's more leeway in terms of how the Pesach goes. Mark, you waited so patiently, it held it.
I was going to say, wouldn't that be consistent with the fact that there's no lachem outside of the first day, then all those Etrog, Sulim, Demai, and Orla would not apply if you're holding lachem, would not apply except for the first day.
Yeah.
So that would be consistent.
I mean,
all the Mishnayos.
Wait a second. The Demai and that's if you hold that it's a din mamon. But if you hold it's a din achila, you still can't eat it the other days. Are you saying, but there's no lachem anyway? If there's no lachem at all, then it doesn't matter. Yeah.
One more second. If you're deriving that from lachem.
Right, and there's no lachem.
The eating part from lachem.
Yeah, that's true.
Would have to say that
that's
on
true.
days 2 through 20.
7, yeah, whatever. 2 through 7.
You're not going to be able to. It wouldn't apply. So
With the that's correct. That's correct. The only exception would be, again, the Rambam and the understanding of the Kapot Tamarim is that if there's any kind of Isser Hana or Achila, then you actually lack the status of it being a pre-eitz. And if it's not a pre-eitz, it doesn't exist, then you can't use it.
That would be true of any element of Hana, smell or whatever. If it's
Yeah.
lacking, you wouldn't be able to use it.
Right. Yeah. These are halachic issues of Hana that are missing. Right. That's the point. Yeah. But according to everybody else, I think you're correct.
I'm trying to get rid of the eating.
I know.
That's
Yeah. So look, that's what we're going to see now.
If you drive it from lachem, then you only have that issue on day 1.
Right. Yeah. Correct. Unless it lost its status as a pre as a result of the fact that it had as a result of the fact that it had this isser associated with it.
Lose the status of a pre, which is the status of being something you can eat.
Right. Correct.
And
That's
oil
just
as
an
well
eating
is
issue.
still a pre, it's just maybe not a true. Well, it's still a pre. It's just not a pre you can eat. You have to.
So when it's a pre that you can't eat, the Kapot Tamarim's understanding of the Rambam is it's not a pre-eitz anymore.
Got it. Right. Okay.
Strange but true. But that's seems to be what he holds. Look with me now. Now we'll get on to the page. This was all just sort of conceptual lining up. Okay, we have ulakachtem, we have lachem, we have hadar, we have nigmar pirio, all these different issues. We analyzed a little bit. We spoke about it. Let's try to understand a little bit more in. We're going to do this Tosafot here on Lamed Hamid Aleph. Before we get to it, though, we do have to do a little more activation energy in the Gemara itself, what I like to call. So again, if you look it's almost halfway down the page. The first words on the line are Omer ze Etrog. It's the tail end. It's 35a. It's the tail end of the previous discussion, which we're not going to go back to, which again has its place in myriad drushot that sprung up for me already when I saw it. So I'm covered for most of Sukkot. Halavai, I should remember what my notes mean by the time I get to Sukkot. But okay, now look with me at the Gemara, the two dots. This is now review, but it's only for. I'm not going to learn out the whole Gemara. I'm only doing for the purpose of getting to the Tosafot. But you can't just take the Tosafot cold. You know it's flying. So the Gemara had this short one-liner. Dachat puzzle. The Gemara said, "My tama kaven d'lasreifa kai kitute machtat shiure." Words we're very familiar with because we saw it already from before. There's no shear to it. It doesn't exist anymore. It's been crunched down. It's pulverized to nothingness. It's dirt because it's going to be burned. So it's like it's burned already. Yeah, it's been condemned, if you will. Now, v'shel orla puzzle. Now we come to orla is puzzle. So again, orla first 3 years can't use it. So my time pligi ba Rabbi Chia bar Avin Rabbi Asi chad amar lefisha ein ba Heter Achila v'chad amar lefisha ein ba din mamon. So we have right here the two possibilities. Rashi tells us lefisha ein ba Heter Achila. Look at Rashi. It's just flip to the right of it and go scan your eye up about 13, 14 lines. The first two words on the line of Rashi are lashon dira. Dibra marchel lefisha ein ba Heter Achila. Rashi writes, Brachmana Amar Lachem, Hara'ui Lachem, Bechol Darchei Hana'ato. According to Rashi, Lafi She'ein Ba Heter Achila means you can use it for any and all elements of its benefit, enjoyment, etc. Yeah? If you can't, then you can't use it. And that's the problem with the Orla, the Etrog of Orla. Rashi again, Lafi She'ein Ba Din Mamon. It doesn't have the Din of Mamon. She'ein Sheve Pruta. It's not worth anything. It has no value. The Isurei Hanahu, Hilkach Lav Shalachemhu. It has a financial problem. It's not worth anything now. It's off limits. So the Gemara now goes into, now back to the Gemara. I hope you're holding, you have two hands, God willing, you can use both. Kasal Kadaita Date, Mandaboy Heter Achila Lo Bai Din Mamon, Mandaboy Din Mamon Lo Bai Din Heter. We think that there is an argument between Rabbi Chia bar Avin and Rabbi Asi about which factor is determinative, but they don't hold both. Nobody holds you need both. That's the assumption. But then the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Tnan. Shel Truma Tmeya. What about the situation of Truma Tmeya? Right? So we have here puzzle, not psula, but really puzzle. Truma Tmeya, the Mishnah said, was puzzle. Wait a second. Truma Tmeya means you can't use it. You can't eat it. But can't use it? There is a case you could use it. Stop here. You can't eat it. That's good, right? Hare misika tacha tavshilo. You can burn it under your food. You can use it as fuel. Everybody agrees that you need to be able to eat it, right? And if you can't eat it, then you can't use it. Everybody agrees that. What's the argument? Ki plige bedin mammon. They're arguing about the question of whether the etrog has to be something that has monetary status, or whether it's nothing because it doesn't have a shava pruta because it is off limits. Ma'asavar heter achila ba'inan, din mamon lo ba'inan. It does have to have the permissibility to eat it, but it doesn't matter if you can or can't say that it has any status, a financial value. Umar savar, the other opinion, din mamon nami ba'inan. You also need to have an ongoing status to it, that it actually exists from a financial perspective, right? So, and it's left as an argument. And we have an example that comes up where the Gemara wants to basically understand that there might be a case that we could conjure that really does show us a practical distinction between these two positions. My benayu sounds rather academic. No, ika benayu. What's that? Maser sheni shibir. When you talk about Maser sheni in Yerushalayim, alibad Rabbi Meir, when it's according to the position of Rabbi Meir, and here we have to press pause and remind ourselves that there's a machloket elsewhere in Shas, where Rabbi Meir holds that Maser sheni, when you bring it to Yerushalayim, you're eating something that doesn't belong to you. You are, so to speak, a miniature Kohen or a miniature Levi. Right? You've taken the tithe, it's 10%, just like the Maser Rishon, but the Maser Sheni, that goes to you as a Yisrael. But there's a limit where you can eat it. When you bring it up to your Shalim, it can become yours. It's still not yours. It belongs to Hashem. But when you eat it, that's a permission that you have, even though it doesn't have a din mammon, because you couldn't traffic in it. It doesn't belong to you anymore. Chachamim, of course, the majority opinion, actually hold it does belong to you. So they wouldn't really be an issue. So Lamanda Amar Lafisha Ein Ba Heter Achila, Harayesh Ba Heter Achila, you can eat it. Lamanda Amar Lafisha Ein Ba Din Mamon, Masa Sheni Mamon Gavohu. But if you hold that the issue is that it has no Din Mamon, has no monetary statue now, according to Rabbi Meir at least, it belongs to Mamon Gavoha, right? It belongs to the temple treasury, so it's not really yours. Tistayim. Now the Gemara tries to sort of drill down. So who holds what? The Rabbi Asi, the Amar Lafisha Ein Ba Din Mamon. Rabbi Asi, Etrog Shomasa Shinu Divrei Meir. We have a brighter where he says that Etrog Shomasa Shinu Divrei Meir Ein Adam Yotze Bo Yidei Chovati Yom Tov L'Divrei Yom Tov, comma L'Divrei Chachamim Adam Yotze Bo Yidei Chovati Yom Tov. But according to the Chachamim, a person would be Yotze on Yom Tov. Why is Rabbi Asi the one saying it? Because Rabbi Asi is the one who actually thinks that the problem with the Etrog of Orla is that it doesn't have a din mamon. That's its problem. That's all we have to see right now, because then the Gemara goes into what's called gufa. Gufa means, in our parlance, say, turn up the microscope, something that we just quoted. We're going to analyze and drill down even farther in, right? The body of the text is literally what it means, but right, we're gonna focus on it. So we'll stop here for now. Look with me at Tosafot, Dibur Hamatch Lefi She'ein Bo Heter Achila. And just to give you the roadmap, ambitious though it may be, and maybe a little too ambitious, tonight we'll see Tosafot. Next time we'll see the Rambam, and then we'll look at the Torah from Rav Soloveitchik in the notes written up by Herschel Reichman Shlita, one of the Rosh Yeshiva University, where he tries to unpack some of this Rambam, Tosafot, Rambam, the Gemara based on the Rav's Torah. So I don't know if we'll get that far, but at least we'll do Tosafot on the page. So Lefi She'ein Bo Heter Achila. Right now, let's recall that the psul of the Etrog of Orla again is there a prohibition on eating it, right? And we need to know that when it says in the Torah, "L'kachtem lachem," the din of lachem means you can have all measure of enjoyment from it, including the enjoyment of eating it. And if you don't, again, you don't have it really because it's oksel mitzvato, but in potentio, it exists that way, yeah? And with regard to truma tameya, which is also automatically forbidden in eating, yet we learn something very interesting about this. It turns out that truma tameya, we saw about the burning. How do we know that that's true? I mean, I told you that that's true. The Gemara said it's true. Where did the Gemara derive that from? Now watch what Tosafot do. When you find out how they derive it, you realize there is quite a question here. Lefi she'ein bo heter achila. V'rachmana amar lachem hara'ui lachem b'chol darkei hana'atan. The Torah says lachem, which means that which is appropriate for you in all measure of hana, of enjoyment, including up to and including eating, everything, whatever you want to do with it. Okay. Even though in Parak Bama Madlikin Masechet Shabbat, when it darshans the issue of truma tameya, and it tells you about it, how does it darshan it? It says midichtiv, because the pasuk says lecha shelcha tehei lahasika tachat tavshilecha kaven denitmeit ve'asar katuv shayach lidrosh lecha didei legabe shar hanot k'mo lachem delulav delo shayach be achila. So let me tell you what the pasuk is. And this is really unbelievable. How do we know, the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbat, that one is allowed to burn the truma tameya underneath their pot that they're cooking? Because it says in the pasuk lecha, and lecha is derived to tell you can't eat it, but still lecha because you could burn it and you get enjoyment from it. By Tosafot is saying, wait a second, the word lachem was darshaned right here in our pasuk specifically to say lachem means all types of hana. The Gemara Masechet Shabbat took as an assumption that lecha means even though the truma tameya is aser ba'achila, it's still mutter b'hana. The same word. Now here's the bingo part. I'm putting it on the screen. I'm sorry. It's one of the rare times that the people in the room are listening in. The people on the screen, they see it. Parshat Korach. After the dramatic portion of it involving the story of Korach and the 250 men of renown and the whole story, and the Magefa and the Ketoret. After all that, we have a section about the Kohanim, the Levium, etc. Vaidaber Hashem el Aharon, va'ani hine natati lecha et mishmeret trumotai, plural, l'chol kodshei v'nei Yisrael, lecha netatim, lemoshcha, ulevanecha, lechok olam. How'd I do on the reading?
Very nice.
Thank you. Judah, any thoughts, comments? Well,
Sounds good.
Good, Milda, good, okay.
Yes.
Shkoyach. Now look, more seriously, I was just joking around. The Gemara says the fact that the pasuk in Parshat Korach used the word trumotai was somehow miraculously to teach us, and that's the Masorah. Truma, the first truma is truma that is tahora, that you eat, and there's also something called truma tmeya, and truma tmeya is still lecha. That's the drasha. That's the drasha in Masachet Shabbat. Says Baal Tosafot. There were darshaning lecha is somehow a riboy to include the possibility that while you can't do X, you could still do Y and Z. In our context, the word lachem is dafka restrictive. It's a maximalist approach. Either you have everything, you have nothing. So, what Tosafot does, which is generally what they do, is obviously they want to show, now that there is a thesis and antithesis, they want to show the synthesis, how are these not actually contradictory, or to say it differently, what actually is the distinction between the drush with regard to Truma Tmeya, which incidentally wouldn't matter so much, except for the fact that it's actually the whole argument of the Gemara. This is how the Gemara makes its argument, right? Right here on 35a. Are you watching me and listening to me at the same time? Just to see a pasuk. Unbelievable. Here, there you go. Do you see I highlighted it?
Because he doesn't want to miss the stuff.
Well, you see the pasuk. Now I'm turning off the pasuk. Okay.
Wow.
At least mute it. We're in stereo here. It's never happened. Can't shut it off now. Now we're stuck. This is all being recorded. Solely for posterity. Thank you. Is there a way? Okay, sure. So listen, Truma Tmeya is the whole focus of the Gemara. The whole way the Gemara is built is around the idea. Truma Tmeya, that's not good. But you'd have a Hana. Oh, so what is the factor with regard to the Etrog? Is it the Heter Achila or is it the Din Mammon? You know what our proof text will be? We'll just look to, well, before we get to Master Sheni, we did Truma Tmeya. And we showed that in our own Mishnah, what did it say? Truma Tmeya, puzzle, can't use it. Why not? Truma Tmeya, you can get Hana from it. Maybe you should be allowed to pick up the Etrog that's from Truma Tmeya. Gemara says no. But something, you understand the contrast? The same word is darshan in one direction, expansive. The other way, it's so maximalist that it ends up being restrictive because you didn't reach that bar. So again, let's nachamol. V'rachmana amar lachem hara'ui lachem b'chol darkei ha'anatan. So the Torah here, when it said lachem, means you own it completely. V'afal gav the gabe truma tmeya, even though with regard to truma tmeya, darshina perak bam madlikim masechet Shabbat daf chavchem aleph midichtiv lecha. Shelcha tehei lasika tachat tavshilecha. So, from the fact that the Torah went out of its way in Parshat Korach to say lecha, it means it shall be yours, even if it's tameh, so that you could burn it under your food stuffs, you're cooking. Kaven denitmate of asra hakatuv shaykh lidrosh lecha didei legabe shar hanaot. Maybe we should really be darshaning, since it is tameh and it's usr, and the Torah said it's usr. Maybe we could be doresh it that the lecha in our context, right, is with regard to the rest of Hana as well, just like we said with regard to lachem. In other words, to say it's usr, the truma tmeya is usr ba'achila. That we know already because the Torah tells us if it's Truma Tmeya. That's not from that pasuk. But by the by, also, what does Lecha tell you? You're also not allowed to have any other Hana from it. That's not what the Gemara does. This is the exact opposite. You must say Shabbat. With regard to lulav, you can't eat the lulav. You can eat the fruits that are on the date palm, the dates. But the lulav is not edible, right? So when it says lachem with regard to lulav, the lachem of lulav absolutely must be a type of connection to it, an enjoyment, a benefit that accrues to you that does not include eating. So the Baalei Tosafot are saying the following, to say it outside. Maybe the etrog of Truma Tmeya should also have a ribui of lachem as a reference to hana'ah through the taking of it as being now mutter. Is that? I can't eat this etrog. Yeah, that's true. But just like I can't eat the Truma Tmeya either. But if I could take it in my hand, the Truma Tmeya, pick it up and wave it around, can I do that with it? I could. No mitzvah status to it, but I could do that. That's still permitted because the Torah used the word lecha. And if I want to even put it underneath my foodstuffs, use it as fuel, that's fine. So why couldn't I do that also with regard to etrog? That's the basic idea, right? So the Tosafot basically answer the following. They're saying it as follows: that Truma Tameya is Tameya already in the Pshat. So the Isser Achila there is very obvious. The drasha of the word lecha, right, is not going to be a further drasha to exclude more things, in as much as once the Torah said Truma Tameya, you may not eat it, it gave you the Isser. Now the next portion of it is, and what part of it remains for you? Here's what it is: enjoyment. It didn't have a prohibition in the case of Etrog. There's no prohibition and then the word lachem. It just is the word lachem. The fact that the lachem, and it's used the word with regard to lulav, l'kachtam lachem b'yom rishon, priyei tzadar, kapot tamarim, etc., etc. With regard to lulav, it's certainly not related to achila. By the way, hadassim and aravot also not related to achila. You can't eat them. So there, when it used, because it's not a pre, so therefore the word lachem has to refer to something that you can derive hana'ah from, as opposed to an isser hana'ah. Right? An Isra Achila, sorry. With regard to the Etrog, Achila is an option. But now the word Lachem means something inclusive of a Heter Achila as well. In other words, with regard to the Etrog, once we said that the Etrog Truma Tameya is no good, right, to be used, the issue that the Truma Tameya is going to be able to be used for the purpose of burning it is only because the Truma Tameya generally had already a prohibition stated in the Torah. You can't eat this. So when the word lecha comes after it, against that backdrop, we understand, okay, eating's off limits because the Torah said that. What part of it remains yours? Right? So what Tosafot basically says, hana. What Tosafot basically is saying is, you're not comparing apples to apples. It is the same word. But in one case, the word lecha is the Torah says, after I'm speaking the voice of the Torah, if you can imagine something so audacious and chutzpahdik, after the Torah says, after I've taken away from you the Heter Achila, I'm still telling you something, part of this is still lecha. What's that? Mm-hmm. The part that involves hana'ah. When the Torah wants to give you the mitzvah of Etrog and lulav and hadassim and aravot, where for hadassim, aravot and lulav, there's no Heter Achila because there's no Achila. When the Torah uses the affirmative expression lachem, it must of necessity mean that, of course, it means something that's blanketing it. It has to belong to you completely. You have free reign with it. In 3 out of the 4 cases, there's no Heter Achila because there's no Achila. So in the one where there is Achila, so that's Aser. Follow? It's not coming against the backdrop of a prohibition, and now this is the license. It's just the all-encompassing standard that obtains for all 4 of the categories. Remember, they're all listed in order, but they have the same rule that applies to them. Have I confounded everybody or just some people?
Me a little bit. I think
Ask. This is.
So we started with a Mishnah that said if it was Truma
34b, yeah.
Yeah, it was possible. Truma Tameya, it was possible, right?
Okay.
Right, and that came from the idea of lachem, meaning, and lachem was defined as having to be able to be used in all of its possibilities. Comes Tosafot and says, well, I got this Gemara in Shabbos that says, here's a lachem, where it isn't used.
Or lecha.
Okay.
Yeah, same idea. Yeah.
It's not usable in all of its pieces, and yet we still consider it to be usable, not possible. So now,
Usable for Heter Hana'ah. You're allowed to burn it under your. You can't eat it.
But it has a use. It has
Yeah.
a use of.
Yeah. Right.
So by that definition, our Etrog should be the kasher is our Etrog should not be puzzled.
Because when it says in the Mishnah, it says Truma. Where are we here? With regard to where am I? The 3rd line of the Mishnah.
Yeah.
Shall Truma Tameya puzzle?
Right.
Why? Why should that be?
So it didn't.
I thought you could get enough from it. Then you can pick it up.
Right. Meaning
Right.
If I
What was that?
if I can't eat it,
Right.
but I can smell it, that should be enough hana to be able to use it, according if we're
To that logic, right.
That logic, right?
If I can burn it, then why can't I just pick it up and wave it around?
Right. So I was good till there.
Okay. So now the next.
Now take me.
Okay. So the next piece is like this. What?
Where you ended up.
Yeah, yeah.
It seemed like we ended up where we started.
Well, that's actually sort of what we did do, but the question is, after we threw in this monkey wrench of how could it be that the word lecha is darshan in the context of truma tmeya in order to teach some license, and yet in the world of lulav and etrog, we're holding up the word lachem as, and by the way, if you're not allowed to eat it, you also can't use it for the mitzvah. Why can't you use it for the mitzvah?
Now they're saying lachem is not in entirety as long as a piece of it is hana.
No. The lachem is a totality. That's the point. That the lachem in the context of the daled minim means on everything. Means you have to have all pistons have to be firing, including the Heter Achila. If you're missing the Heter Achila, you cannot use it for the etrog, for the mitzvah of the daled minim.
Okay.
The point is that the word lachem in the daled minim context is not coming against the backdrop of a prohibition involving any of the daled minim. It is the standard. The standard equals that you have to have lachem means a total usage.
How does Tosafot reconcile that with the Gemara and Shabbos?
And the Gemara and Shabbos is first there was something restrictive
Oh, I see.
that was explicit. Thou shalt, I mean, I'm ad-libbing, but don't eat truma tmeya. You may not eat it. But there's this word lecha, and you can guard that which is the mishmeret lecha from trumotai. So the Gemara darshans trumotai, truma tahora, and trumotai, truma tahora, which you can eat, and truma tamei, which you can't eat, but you can get these other elements of enjoyment from. The context, that's how they reconcile it. The context over yonder is against the back something restrictive, and then something permissive that comes to mitigate it somewhat. But here there was nothing restrictive that's being mitigated. And how does he know? How do they know? Because the lulav itself is not even edible. There is no such thing as eating a lulav. Therefore, the concept of the prohibition against using a lulav that you don't own, has the word lachem, means across the board, any form of hana is denied you, then you can't use that lulav because it's not fully belonging to you. It so happens, the world of etrog, one of the forms of hana is also eating. And if that's the one that's denied, then that's bad enough to destroy its integrity. Yeah? Ish?
I'm back on Lakeshore.
You're back on lecture. Okay. All right. Okay. Next part of the Gemara, Tosafot rather. Tosafot say the following. Tosafot say you might ask the following question: V'im tomar, the last word, the last word on the line. It's an acronym. V'im tomar. Okay. V'im tomar gabi lulav shel asher v'shir irani dachat. With regard to the lulav of asher and ir hadidachat, which are of course not edible, but the Gemara had already said at the beginning of the parak. Lama lan time de michtat shiurei. Why was it that the Gemara there already said, and it's just like cut and paste, for hadassim and arava, and now for etrog, that shalashev shinudachat, that it's kitute mechtat shiur. Remember that?
Yeah.
That it doesn't exist. It's like pulverized, doesn't have a shear.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Now says the Tosafot, tepukle mishun deba'inan din mamon. Why didn't the Gemara just say these things are off limits because they don't belong to the cherem. They're what's the word? They're under a ban. You can't use it. The filo man de lo chayish hachat gabi etrog din mamon haimishum de ikar la achila. Okay, so even if you're going to say here with regard to the world of etrog that we're saying with regard to the etrog that I'm not worried about din mamon. I'm only worried about din hana, about the ability to eat it. But whether it has value or not doesn't matter to me. Remember that was the debate in the Gemara.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, aval lulav de leit be achila, ktiv lachem didei le'inyan din mamon. But with regard to the lulav, remember there's a requirement of lachem. Why did the Mishnah rather, or the Gemara, reach for the reasoning that why can't you use the lulav of an Asherah tree, the lulav from the Irani Dachat? The answer is because it doesn't have the right shear. Why did you say the reason you can't use those items is because you don't own them, because you can't get enjoyment from them, because the Torah already says it's under a cherem. Why'd I have to reach for this other concept? Understand? With regard to the etrog, we can keep saying, well, you can't really eat it, so if you can't eat it, then that's no good. But the lulav, you can't pick it up and shake it. It exists as an object physically. Halachically, the Gemara says is nothing. It's a zero. Okay, but there's an easier answer, which is remember we just said it before in Tosafot, that the word lachem is all encompassing. You have to be able to get all measure of enjoyment from it. In the case of a lulav, you can't eat it. So it refers to the picking it up and the using it for any other purpose. So again, it would have just been simpler. The yesh lomar denaka de michtat shiure k'de lifsol b'yom tov sheni. On Yom Tov Sheni, meaning day 2 through 7, Why can't you use that lulav? Because remember, we just finished saying maybe the din lachem only exists on the first day. That's what Tosafot themselves said on 29b, ba'in and hadar v'leka. But certain things did get carried over. What's one of the things that carried over? Oh, kitute machtat shiure. It's true it's not lachem on day 2 through 7, but I don't need lachem days 2 through 7. Remember? That's what they themselves said. But the problem is, if it's kitute machtat shiure, then it's like it doesn't exist. So then that's the issue. That's the problem. It doesn't exist. Therefore, Yom Tov Sheni. And that's why the Gemara goes out of its way to explain the rationale of Shalosh Shivashim Dachat separate from the general requirement of Lachem. The Bible proves our point generally that Lachem doesn't obtain on other days. You need another argument, which is sure it's like it does not exist in this moment. Next, V'im Tamar Etrog Shel Orla. If you want to say with regard to the Etrog of Orla, remember you can't eat it. Forbidden. So Tepuk like the Michtat Shiure. Right? You should also say that it's Michtat Shiure. The mitzvah to b'sreifa. The kachashiv leibit shruma perak batra b'hadin israfin v'min hatam hanisrafim lo yikberu.
Because it's involved in the burning.
Dafilu b'doraita havya orla b'sreifa. Yalfin limikir lehakerem dichtiva pen tikdash v'darshinan pen tukad eish. So in other words, the Gemara now says, wait a second, you can ask another question. When it comes to the Etrog of Orla, an Etrog of Orla you're not allowed to use, but not only you're not allowed to use the Etrog of Orla, which that is true, but you're actually an Etrog of Orla, if you picked it, it stands to be burned. It also is subject to Kitute Machtat Shiure. The Gemara never invoked Kitute Machtat Shiure for the world of Orla, Etrog Shel Orla, only for Etrog Shel Asher and Shel Dachat. Why didn't it invoke it there? In fact, say the Baalei Tosafot, that we learned that it's true that something that is an object that is orla is kitute machshirei, just like we say about kile hakerem. That's if you mix in a vineyard and a stay lavan, a grain field. If you mix the items together, you have to burn it. You can't use it. It's considered like a zero. It doesn't exist on a shear, so it doesn't have a shear. So we should have applied it as well in the same way. By Psul Etrog Shel Truma Tameya. The mitzvah to b'sreifa. By the way, if you have Truma Tameya, remember we just learned this Gemara a minute ago. If you had an Etrog of Truma Tameya, which you couldn't use for the Daled Minim, you know you could do it. You could put it underneath your cholent and burn it. We just said that. Remember? You know why you could burn it? Because it's ready to be burned. Something that's ready to be burned. It came into the L'Sreifa Kai. It's kitute machtat shiurei. That's what it means. It doesn't exist now. Why was it? The Baitis want to know why is the Gemara like picking and choosing different reasons in different contexts? Just give me a blanket one kitute machtat shiurei for all of these. Orla, Truma Tameya. So v'lam time the Heter Achila, right? Why are you even giving me the issue that you don't have a Heter Achila? We don't even need that Heter Achila as the problem, and I can't eat it, and that's the problem. It doesn't exist halachically. There's no shear. V'yesh lomer said the Baalei Tosafot. Here's the answer. You're right. The truth is, admittedly, the Etrog of Orla is really the Sreifa Kai. Therefore, it really is Kitut Machtat Shiurei. But the debate with respect to the psul for this Etrog, as a result of each of Heter Achila or the Din Mamon, is because of the Maser Sheni in Yerushalayim question, where the question is if we say there's a Heter Achila on something and we need that, or do we also need a Heter Mamon? I guess according to Rabbi Meir, right? Where yes, you can have the Heter Achila, but no, it's not yours. So I'm reading it now inside. The truth is, didn't need it. The truth is, you could have just said Kitut Machtat Shiurei, would have covered everything. But the reason why the Gemara is reaching with regard to Orla, that it's an Isser Achila, doesn't just say Kitut Machtat Shiurei, is because of the nafkamina of Maser Sheni, as we learned in the Gemara. Kidamaskinan, as we learned in the Gemara just now. Ika benayu, Maser Sheni. What's the distinction between these two? Whether it's just an issue of Heter Achila or you also need the Din Mamon? Answer is Maser Sheni. V'alibed Rabbi Meir. And that's according to Rabbi Meir. Sheet Umad the Master, Haino Libed Rabbanan. We got to go into Mincha in a minute. So it's starting in 5. So I'm watching the clock. 3 lines left. 4 lines left. Nami, Maser Sheni B'Gvulin. They could have also said there's a nafkamina not only with regard to Maser Sheni in Yerushalayim, there's a nafkamina of Maser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim. What's that? The Rabbanan admit that outside of Yerushalayim, there's no din mamon for the bailim, for the owners on it in the Gvulin, because there's no Heter Achila. Where's the Heter Achila for Maser Sheni? Only in one place, Yerushalayim. Outside of Yerushalayim, you know what this thing is worth? Nothing, because it's not the food, because it's not in Yerushalayim. Even the Rabbanan hold when you get to Yerushalayim, it's my tithe. I took it, Maser Sheni, I'm going to eat in Yerushalayim. I feel so good. And they say you own it when you eat it. But if you're outside, you do not own it then. It's like given back to you when you get to Yerushalayim. So the idea here, right? So you look up the Gemara in Sanhedrin Parak Chelek, it tells you, let's say you have dough of Maser Sheni. So there's a machloket, or the dough of Maser Sheni, you have to take challah from it. Rabbi Meir says it's pater. Why? Because you don't own it. Rabbanan say you do have to take Maser Sheni. You have to take challah. Why? Of challah from the dough of Maser Sheni? Because it is yours. Rav Chizda says that machloket is only in Yerushalayim. Outside of Yerushalayim, everybody agrees that the dough of Maser Sheni is pater from challah because it belongs to Mammon Gavo. It belongs to the temple treasury. Meaning, what the Bali Tosafot have shown here, and it may seem labyrinthine to you, is the reason why the Gemara had to go through all these steps and couldn't just content itself with, after they got through the initial machinery of the question of what is lecha versus lachem in the two different contexts, is you could have asked these questions about kitute machtat shiure is a much easier, smoother answer. You don't have to get into all these machinations. Yeah, but the Maser Sheni Yerushalayim question brings us back to the question of maybe there's something you don't own but are allowed to eat, or conversely, something you are not allowed to eat, but you do own truma tmeya. So those two are playing off each other, which prevented us from just having an easy answer here. Even though it's true, all of these things, Etrog shel orla and truma tmeya, they are omeid l'sreifa, kaven de l'sreifa kai kesarov dam. It's like it's already burned, and therefore it is kitut demachlet shiurei. But because of these issues, truma tmeya with its permutations, Maser Sheni with its permutations, the Gemara wanted to try to figure it out with regard to the etrog that might be in that predicament. That's all we have time for tonight. We got to go to Mincha. Okay, next week, Monday night, we'll continue. If you didn't catch all this, fear not. That's why we're getting together next week again. And then we'll all see the Rambam, and hopefully we'll see the Rav as well. And wish everyone a